Okay, brilliant. So welcome to this week's Active Travel Cafe. Absolutely brilliant to have you all with us. We've got a really good session this evening. So we're going to start in a moment with a roundup of news from around the UK. If anybody wants to pile in on reflections on the King's speech, feel free, but also flag up any new developments in your area, all that sort of good stuff. And then we've got a really good speaker for this evening for everybody to have a good debate with, which is Dr. Tom Haines-Doran, who's a researcher at the University of Leeds. And he's going to be sharing his recent research into car ownership, how it's financed, what its trends are, and we can get into all of that. What are all those SUVs doing on our streets, and how on earth are people paying for them? So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Tom in just a moment. Okay, but that's enough of an intro from me. Let's find out what's happening all over the lovely UK. Simon, your hand was vigorously up first, so do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very, very brief because I was chatting to Robin already, and I'm coming back, I think, on the 21st, hopefully, to present LCC's new dangerous junctions map in full then. But suffice to say, as I put in the chat, please don't go and look at it now because it keeps crashing. It's had 7,000 people on it already today. So we've had loads of media, and yeah, lots of people are going and looking at it. Keeps falling over. So if you go and do look at it and it says ow, and there is no map there, apologies, it'll be back up later. Yeah, we've produced a London-wide map that allows you to go via boroughs down to clusters of junctions for pedestrians and cycling using the last 5 years of Stats 19 data. It's by no means perfect as a map, but we think it's flipping brilliant and it's going to be a really useful campaigning tool. And we have some big ideas for what to do with it next year as well already. But yeah, don't go and look at it. There's nothing to see there apart from probably a 404 error or something at this point. But yeah, that's the big news from here. It's in the Standard. It's all over BBC. It's been all over the news. We've just had a big day of it.
Brilliant. Oh, well done, Simon. I mean, if crashing, I'm sure you didn't mean it to crash, but that just shows you've really hit the mark in terms of pent-up demand. Brilliant stuff. Robin, did you want to come in?
Testament to your popularity, Simon. Yes, wow, quite a day in the world of Oxford LTNs today. So I told you last month that we had a second batch of LTNs, the East Oxford ones, approved. So one of the Conservative councillors, the one with the transport brief, Councillor Liam Walker, raised a motion to the full council for the cabinet to go and review them with a view to removing them. So we took a view that this, given the way the Oxfordshire cabinet is and alliance has fallen apart, this is basically a politically divisive mood. He's trying to essentially split the Labour group who have fallen out of the political alliance with the Lib Dems and Greens. So one of the Labour councillors raised an amendment to the motion to say, instead of remove the LTNs, remove the congestion, which was a very cunning move. And today we weren't sure who was going to vote on what, and I was in with, I think we had about 10 speakers in favour of LTNs, similar number against. It was quite passionate. It was, the meeting overran, the people saying we should close down the meeting because it's over time. And the motion on the amendment passed 38 to 19, which basically meant all of the Labour group voted for the amendment, which is fantastic, apart from one or two who abstained or suddenly found themselves ill or absent or something. So that was a really good result. The motion then passed, but essentially it's a meaningless motion because the cabinet's already promised to do that. So basically now we're just hoping that LTNs become, the news quietens down on LTNs. We've got 1 year until the traffic filters come in, which is the big plan to deal with congestion. We're actually hoping that some of that gets brought forward, or something to manage congestion, particularly for the buses, comes in early, because we could really do with some mode shift. But this was a This was good news, snatched from bad potential today. So we're feeling quite happy.
Oh, that's great, Robin. Good news from Oxford. That's what we like to hear. Now, given that I cut him off last time we were together mid-rant, I'm wary, but I'm going to bring him in. H in Glasgow, do you want to come in?
Whoops. Yeah, I was going to just highlight, we've got Pedal on Parliament AGM this Thursday to bring up. And noting the theme on road danger, I've just sent a message over to Robert in Glasgow. I don't know Robert in Glasgow. We've got to try and get some links together. But it's now 4.5 years since Ashley Lennon was crushed by a left-turning HGV driver. He was turning left from the right-hand lane because the road had been narrowed with narrow lanes just to make it look like it had more capacity. And the railings that she was crushed against are still bent. 4.5 years later, nothing has happened. And I think we've got to raise the issue of if things go wrong, we report them. Who does anything about it? What's going to be holding people to account?
Thanks, H. Okay, have we got any other updates from around the UK? Bob, do you want to come in? You're on mute, Bob.
I think the best thing is I'll be commenting with Simon in the chat about the dangerous junctions thing. I do think it's good, but there is an issue which is something I've been going on about for 30 years. So I'm allowed to be a bit sensitive about it. And it has been raised on Twitter, so it's important. I'll do it in the chat. Second thing is Cyclox's AGM, which maybe Robin wants to talk about. I understand they have an interesting speaker. And third thing, the RDRF 30th anniversary webinar on December the 11th. A lot of big speakers on that. Will be sending out publicity. Do put that in your diaries. There is a possibility that we will need a tech person to do what Steve and Robin and Roxanne do here in terms of sort of general Zoom management. So again, I will put something in the chat. And if any of you fancy yourself as being kind of tech wizards, actually, they're not tech wizards. You're just tech wizards to tech illiterates like me. And there will be a bit of money in it for you because you just have to spend a bit of time on things. So there's 3 things there, and I'll do stuff in the chat. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and please, and as well as having a debate with Simon, make sure you pop the details of that session in the chat for us so we don't lose it. And then we'll decide whether the amazing Active Travel Cafe Dream Team are up for hire. Maybe we are. Anyway, so thanks, Bob. Any other updates from around the UK? I noticed, Roger Geffen, you've managed to join us. We were thinking about doing a kind of deconstruction of the King's speech this evening, weren't we, Roger? And whether it would have anything in there sort of barreling in with against the war on drivers. So if you've got any thoughts on whether we've dodged a bullet or not, it'd be lovely to hear from you. But while you collect yourself, Roxanne, did you want to come in before Roger?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of news. I don't know if this is a brag or news, but anyway, recently Chris Boardman was appointed a visiting fellow for the Intellectual Forum at Jesus College here in Cambridge. And I guess you'll be in good company because I've also been appointed a senior research associate for the same organization. I don't know what that is yet, but it looks like it'll be a great opportunity to maybe put forward some thought leadership around active and sustainable travel and urbanism and so on. Anyway, there'll be a little bit of announcement coming out, but I want to put it to this fabulous network. If you've got ideas and collaborations and anything that I can use that platform for to help our cause, I'm keen to hear it. So anyway, watch this space and share your ideas, please. And fingers crossed, I get to go to a fancy college dinner with Chris Boardman soon. That'll be fun.
Oh, brilliant news, Roxy. Oh, congratulations from all of us, I'm sure. Hey, should we do a quick active travel round of applause for Roxy? Come on. Brilliant. See a screen full of happy people. How about that? Right, before I come to you, Adam, I'll just go to Roger. Roger Geffen, any thoughts from you on politics today?
Yes, thanks. And sorry to join late. Yes, so the firstly, did you get an update before we go to the King's Speech stuff? Did you get an update on the with my other hat on, with my Transport Action Network hat on, about the progress with the legal challenge? You've all got that, have you? So we've got permission to go to a full hearing on all 3 grounds of our legal challenge. That will probably, now we don't know exactly when, but it'll probably be early next year. So watch this space. But it's good news that we've basically got all 3 grounds of our challenge through. Okay, so putting back my side and UK hat on. So yeah, King's Speech. The media reports of legislation that would have been all about the war on the motorists, sort of the idea that they were going to put down things about 20 mph speed limits, purely so that they could taunt the opposition parties by saying, come on, Labour, are you going to impose blanket 20 mph speed limits on the whole of England, just like you've done on Wales, or are you going to disown what the Welsh government has done? None of that seems to be happening, at least not in the legislation. There are, however, four bills and a draft bill that are potentially relevant for cycling. I will just canter through them quickly. So the first up is the pedicabs brackets London bill, which is, according to the King's Speech, to deal with the quote scourge of pedicabs in London. Now, pedicabs in London currently operate through a legal loophole. They're currently able to operate as stage carriages, which basically don't have a definition and no one can regulate them, which is actually a problem for anyone trying to operate a pedicab in a reputable manner, because the reputable operators can all be undermined by the cowboys who blare out music, rip off tourists with completely stupid prices. All of that stuff does need cleaning up. We are supporting the cause of the sort of responsible operators for a clean-up, so that responsible pedicab operations can thrive, because you drive out the cowboys. However, the situation outside London is completely opposite. Instead of being a huge legal loophole, we've got such tight regulation. Basically, pedicabs would have to operate as taxi carriages with the same sort of requirements for driving licenses, insurance, and all the rest of it. Basically, pedicabs outside London can't operate at all on a commercial basis. So we think that the legislation should support pedicabs outside as well as inside London. That's the first bit. Second bit is 2 bills. So there's a sentencing bill and what is it? I can't remember. There's a sort of an offences bill and a sentencing bill. We're going to have to look at what exactly they say to revive all of the issues we were dealing with 2 years ago, pointing out that the government still has not fulfilled its promise made in 2014, made again in 2021, to carry out a proper overhaul of road traffic offences and penalties, to sort out the distinction between careless and dangerous driving, to make much greater use of driving bans as a sentencing option, particularly at a time when prison overcrowding is guiding a lot of the policy thinking and all this, deal with the exceptional hardship loophole, tighten up the sentences for hit and run when you leave someone for dead in the road, and so on. So that's all of that. The last one is autonomous vehicles, where we really need to think long term about how to put in place a legislative framework that protects the safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and other non-motorised users rather than undermining them. Actually, at this point, a lot of what they've said so far in the explanatory notes is probably helpful. It reflects the recommendations of the Law Commission, to which we made extensive submissions. It's basically it looks like it's going to say that a self-driving vehicle should not be allowed on the road at all if it relies on a human to take over in an emergency. That is absolutely right. If the motor manufacturers and the system operators were allowed to put out vehicles that relied on humans and then made humans liable for taking over in an emergency, and made them liable if they failed to do so, then that is basically the manufacturers abdicating their responsibility to provide safe vehicles. So it looks like the government is going in the right direction, following the recommendations of the Law Commission on that. The question we're going to have to ask, though, is how does somebody who's been injured, an injured pedestrian or a cyclist, who may not remember how the collision occurred, how do they know whether to bring their claim for injury damages against the driver or the manufacturer of the vehicle and its systems? It's an obvious risk of huge inequality of arms. The injured person may not remember what happened, whereas the motor manufacturer has spent squillions on their technology. They've got all the cameras and sensors, and they have a huge commercial interest in not disclosing any flaw with their technology. So we're going to be arguing for effectively the presumed liability principle, i.e. an assumption that the self-driving car should be assumed, or well, it's that the body that it provides as insurance should be assumed to be liable unless that insurer can prove that the injured pedestrian, cyclist, or whoever was clearly at fault. In other words, it's basically the presumed liability principle that I'm sure you are all aware of, which we would actually like to see applied more generally, but it's particularly critical if we're dealing with autonomous vehicles. So those are the sort of issues we are going to be dealing with. But yes, you're right. We have dodged the bullet of any legislation that's really about the plan for the motorist, other than potentially the pedicab point. Okay.
Absolutely brilliant, Roger. Thank you. So that was a superb roundup of what's implied today, and lots to think about. Fascinating stuff there. I hadn't even thought about some of those implications on autonomous vehicles. That's something we should perhaps return to, Roger. Perhaps a session on it here on the cafe would be good. Thank you, Roger. Really appreciate that. Adam, over to you. I'm going to keep these next three swift, if you don't mind, so we can get
to so there's
Adam.
Just two things that I'm guessing is coming up at some point. I don't know if anybody has any more information. Is the active travel capability assessments. I don't know if when they're triggering. They were August last year. I know before last year they allowed combined authorities to basically cover their individual highways authorities underneath them. But this time around, I understand that it's going to be done on a per highways authority basis. So I don't know how that will work, particularly when your LC whips are sometimes done at combined authority level. And then the other thing, which is, I know that we're coming to the end of the active travel fund tranches. So tranche 5 is coming up, I'm guessing. So does anybody have any ideas about when that's occurring? Because somebody's waving. Mark is.
Yeah, we'll come to
Mark. He will take over.
We'll come to Mark in a moment. Thanks, Adam. I will go to Mark, who is mid beer and chips, as we can all see. Ruth is horrified. Ruth particularly hates anybody eating on Zoom, but you've been drinking and eating at the same time.
I've got a train in 20 minutes, so
okay. Mark,
so
over
I'll
to you.
be really quick. Answering Adam's point, there isn't going to be a self-assessment. I have this from somebody who I can't name at ATE. There isn't a self-assessment going on, except for the ones that scored 0, who are being asked if they are really still 0. So only the 4, is it Leicestershire, West Sussex, and I can't remember the other 2. So they are being assessed, but not the rest. There is active travel. Local authorities are being asked to bid for active travel for E or S. I can't remember if it's extension, and it's the ones that were turned down in active travel 4, and they're being asked if the ones that were turned down can be revised and resubmitted. But there isn't an active travel 5 and 5, if that isn't confusing enough. And I had a question for Roger, which was there anything on micromobility and e-scooters and the new use class of vehicles? End of my bit.
Thank you, Mark. Very briefly.
Good answer to that one. No. Nothing.
That is
nothing in the speech. That doesn't mean that it won't happen, but nothing.
The e-scooter operators are getting extremely edgy, and indeed the e-bike operators, bike share operators, are also getting very edgy about the industry background in which they're operating.
Yes, I must say I was very surprised that they did both autonomous vehicles and pedicabs without dealing with the e-scooter issue. I was assuming that they would either just do separate bills for autonomous vehicles, or if they did both, they would effectively do it something like a vehicle technology or vehicle regulation bill, something like that, and include e-scooters and micromobility vehicles as well. They haven't done that. Doesn't mean that they won't do it in some form or other, but at the moment it's not there. I guess the answer is because the trials are still going. That shouldn't have stopped them, because they only need to create a primary legislative framework that enables future categories of micromobility vehicle to be regulated. rather than actually deciding how to regulate any of the ones that exist at the moment. So I'm surprised they haven't done it, but so far, no, they haven't.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Okay, we're going to keep this very brief. H, back over to you. If you could keep it short, because I want to bring Tracy in. So, H.
Yeah, I was just going to catch up with one of the things that was mentioned, Roger, was pedicabs and e-scooters and such like. We've had a pedicab service, a free pedicab service operating in Glasgow for 17 years, working perfectly happily in the pedestrian areas. And I think part of it is to track down and say, if you're charging money, defeat it, make them free. You can run a pedicab on the advertising that's on the back of the pedicab, and the rider also acts as a tourist information guide and a community policing presence. So it's quite useful there. And I think that's probably most of what I'm going to say on that. I think the other thing is the Domino's Pizza case, that Domino's Pizza got hit when one of their gig economy drivers was involved in a fatal crash. And it was because they were driving their drivers to deliver within 30 minutes or the customer got their money back. And that sort of pressure on the gig economy riders having crashes, we should be tracking this back to Just Eat, Deliveroo and Uber Eats and saying your rider crashed, causing harm. You are liable because you are the principal commanding force or directing principal.
Thanks, H. Point really well made. Right, last contribution, then we're going to our speaker, Tracy from Essex. Please come in.
Hi there. I haven't spoken at this. I've usually got my camera on. So hello, Tracy Vickers, Head of Sustainable Transport from Essex County Council. I just want to come back on the point about Adam's question on assessment. So we're still being asked to do a self-assessment, and that by Active Travel England with a deadline of December. So I don't know if that's different to what you were talking about before, which is an assessment by Active Travel England, but the self-assessment is part of that. And we weren't rated 0, we were rated 2, and we're still doing it. I have heard exactly the same about ATF 5, though. That was all. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Roger, if it's super fast, super quick, come on in.
Thank you very much. Sorry, if I can just do two very quick updates on the low traffic future hat on. Firstly, we've got our last 3 of our series of 5 workshops on greening local transport in your area. This is understanding your the revival of local transport plans and what an opportunity they present. So we'll be doing workshops on that in Bristol this Saturday, Birmingham the following Saturday, and York the Saturday after that. So the 11th, 18th and 25th of November in Bristol, Birmingham and York respectively. We have also produced a guide to what to look for in a good local transport plan. This is on the Low Traffic Future website, which, considering that the government seems to now not be producing guidance on local transport plans anytime soon, despite having promised to produce it in spring 2022, I've now been starting to tell the local authorities that if they haven't got any government guidance, they might as well use ours, and they're really rather warming to this idea. So do have a look at it and download it and show it to a councillor. There's a 4-page glossy leaflet. There's a 20-page more in-depth version. They're all on lowtrafficfuture.org.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks, Roger. Excellent stuff. Get downloading that immediately. It sounds good. Okay, I'm going to move us on to our speaker for this evening. So, Tom, over to you. Take us through your research. We can't wait to hear about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And if I do this, you should see the first slide. Is that right?
Yes, we can see
got
it.
it. I just need to move around a couple of things on my screen. Okay. Right. Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. And it's good to be speaking at Active Travel Cafe, or as I used to know it, Ideas with Beers, which when I first came across it, at least, was during one of the lockdowns. And the context was I live in a place called Levenshulme in Manchester, which has for, I think, nearly 5 years now had some kind of LTM project that hasn't really moved along very quickly, but certainly at the time was in the initial massive backlash phase, and a group of us local residents were trying to work out what to do. And so this issue of sort of the politics, if you like, of car dependency came up quite a lot. unlike a lot of the LTN schemes in London, for example, where I think car ownership is 30 or 40% of residents, in Manchester it's 60 or 70% of residents. So we had, if you like, an even harder task than some parts of London, for example. And it was just a time where all you could do was walk around, and all I could really do was think about this issue. It seemed so sort of stressful and imminent, but also looking at all the cars and thinking about all the people who are angry, and especially thinking about this issue of gentrification, of the so-called culture war that apparently was happening in my neighborhood, but no one could really explain what it was and what the limits were, who was involved, and that kind of thing. And just seeing these massive, expensive cars in what is and I've lived here around 10 years, increasingly massive and expensive cars parking on pavements and things like that, and not really being able to understand it, because my knowledge as an economist is that vast majority of people haven't had a real terms pay increase for the best part of 10 or 20 years. So what's going on here? And then hang on a sec. There we go. And then, sort of to my astonishment, it ballooned from those sort of earlier examples of this so-called culture war in places like Waltham Forest and then Manchester and then London again, to being headline news. And just my amazement that this sort of ridiculous argument that's been going on actually became for a time at least, I don't know if we're still in that time, the number one priority of our government. So just trying to sort of get to this idea, explore this idea of what do we mean by culture, and what does it mean to have a culture of car dependency? What's involved with that? And and just to back that point up again, if people would have seen this wording from the plan for drivers. The explanation, or the common explanation, I think some people who are against car dependency share some of this view too, not necessarily put in this way, is that it's about utility. It's about independence. It's about, sometimes we might even say, selfishness, wanting to go wherever I want, do whatever I want to do, and sod the environment and cyclists and all that kind of thing. But as the government put it, there's some truth in this, isn't there? Like, some people do need cars, and they are potentially a key to unlocking possibilities in your life and that kind of thing. And then there's this idea that drivers are under attack. So the starting point really of my research is to sort of question this utility argument, because the utility argument of driving basically says that the reason we have so many cars everywhere and the reason why they need to be catered for is because people want them. It's the demand and supply argument. And this is what I'm problematizing with this research. So my research focused on, I remember reading a newspaper report about something called personal contract purchases. Now, these are how 90% of cars are financed when they're purchased. New cars are financed when they're purchased. And these have basically, over the past 10, 20 years, replaced what was called hire purchase. I'll get into some of the differences between those two things in a second. But the important message really of my research is that they're associated with higher value purchases and more frequent purchases of new cars. And there's been some commentary and some trying to understand this in the popular and trade press and the motor industry press. They basically say, look, it goes back to this demand thing. The reason why people want this kind of car finance is that people want, it's convenient because they want to buy cars and they've got used to stuff like mobile phone contracts. Whereas I guess, when originally mobile phones came around, you might want it for 5 or 10 years. I don't know. As everyone probably here has, most people here has a mobile phone contract that after 2 years, you're encouraged to throw your phone away and get the latest model. That's essentially what happens with PCPs. But my research questions this sort of demand-driven explanation for this form of finance. And it's partly based on a paper by Mattioli et al., which people might be familiar with, which is about what's called the political economy of car dependency. And one of the strong points that it makes is that the popularity of cars isn't just driven by consumer demand, but it's also driven by the way cars are manufactured and supplied. The really important thing to recognize about the modern car industry is the massive economies of scale. This is Munich, the car plant in Munich. Huge economies of scale. And what that means is when demand goes down for whatever reason, say there's an economic crisis, they find it very difficult and economically impossible, in fact, to reduce capacity because they've made so much investment in the plants and materials that go into making cars. They have to find ways of maintaining consumption. So it's a simple truth of car economics is that they have to be pumped out at vast scale every year to a certain rate, otherwise the car industry is unviable. So the situation is these are new car registrations in Britain, going back to the 1950s. They've leveled off. So there's a problem in what's called the mature markets of Europe, North America, that most people who could possibly want a car or use a car already have one. And what you do in this situation, your industry is to keep making stuff that people need. Actually, they've already got a car. So we've seen a flattening of demand from the sort of early 2000s onwards. And it's not enough, by the way, just for emerging economies to take up some of that slack. It still remains a problem that the mature markets, the demand for new cars isn't increasing in the way that they have to meet the economic necessity, if you like, of the producers. So going back to PCPs, what are they? Probably some people here have one. I didn't know much about them until I looked into them. Basically, the idea was, well, it's best to compare it to the old system of hire purchase, where maybe over a 5 or 6 year contract, you would basically divide the value of the purchase by monthly amounts over those 5 or 6 years. At the end, you would own the car, no more car finance payments to be made. With PCPs, however, a lot of the value of the financial deal that you're making is reserved for what's called a lump sum payment at the end, which is also called the guaranteed value. And it gives you basically 3 options. You can pay this lump sum, which is typically 1/3 to 1/2 of the value of the car. So, maybe £8,000 or £10,000. Very unlikely that people can afford that, and it rarely happens. You return the car, so you don't have a car anymore. Again, extremely unlikely in a situation of car dependency. Or you start a new contract. This is what they want you to do, and you get a new car. And so in that way, this is a graph I've done on the left-hand side. This is a percentage of PCP to total financing. So that includes hire purchase. We're now, like I say, up to about nearly 90%. And in that time, in real terms, taking into account inflation, the average car purchase in the UK value has gone up by £10,000 since 2009. So they've driven, going back to this graph, what has been the solution to fewer people buying new cars? It's to increase the value of the cars that people buy. And therefore, you keep the economy of the car industry going. One thing that we never think about, or hardly ever think about when we're talking about active travel and road justice and this sort of thing, is what's going on with the economics of the car industry and finance. And it's plugged into a global financial system, obviously, but just to indicate that it's not just the car manufacturers, there's a whole financial system behind it in which these, what are called securities for the repayments of the loan, are traded on international markets. And that has a determining and political effect on the politics of active travel, I argue, but is never seen or talked about. And the important thing about this is if you're going to issue securities, if they're going to trade this debt on international markets, then you're going to need to think about the value of that debt. And so they use what are called credit rating agencies to do that. Their main concern is that consumers keep repaying these loans regularly. The derivatives that only have value on the international financial markets if you can be sure that people are going to keep repaying their debts, much the same with mortgages, for example. If you look into the credit rating reports, they tell you something which isn't discussed much in the media or anywhere else. And that's, there's no need to read all this, but it should give you some sense of the scale of the detail of reporting that's given to financial investors about how they, the way they make sure that people will repay their debts, the lengths that they go to ensure that these monthly payments are made. And that's important. And it's important that they, the thing that they do is they try not to restructure the loan. They try not to go into default. But what this is saying is that very quickly they move into repossession. And my argument is that there's something really important about that, given the context. And that is, if you have a way to move to repossession quickly, and you know that's going to be an incentive to consumers to keep repaying that loan. Why do you know that's the case? You know that's the case because of car dependency. And what this means is that they are able to get better credit ratings. That means they're able to lend consumers more money. So, and that's what I say in the first bullet point there. The point is that the consumer's car dependency is leveraged to increase their debt, and that to feed the insatiable demand of the producers for high spending consumers. Essentially, consumers, because they're so vulnerable to car dependency, it makes them easier to lend money to pay for cars. So not only are they more dependent, but you can push more debt onto them. And this is one thing that's keeping the car manufacturers afloat financially. I won't talk in the presentation for too much longer because I think it's good to have a discussion about this. But just to say that this is a highly volatile situation, and we can get very sort of depressed about the culture of car dependency and its seeming intransigence politically and difficulty with dealing with it. But it's built on a house of cards now because of this finance. One of the ways that it's built on the house cards is that by increasing the throughput of high value vehicles, the SUVs in my community, for example, because they're 3-year contracts, very quickly you get lots of high value vehicles on the second-hand markets. But the way the financial structure of PCPs is done is that their value to the financial investor depends on them having a high second-hand value. But the obvious point is the more PCPs you have, the lower, on average, the second-hand value of cars will be, because you're just adding more and more supply into the market. And this has been looked into to some extent by the Bank of England. But logically, it can't continue forever. You can't just keep pumping more and more cars onto the market and putting consumers in ever greater amounts of debt. Something has to give. And the obvious analogy would be something like the subprime mortgage crisis that precipitated the global financial crisis in 2010. Not quite on that scale, but certainly a significant order of magnitude. So the point is that it not only increases the risks for manufacturers, it increases financial risk to consumers. And this comes to the point about politics, right? This is the it's not necessarily motorists against the hippies and the active travel activists culture war. It's the fact that the consumers of motor vehicles themselves are being taken advantage of, and those manufacturers and those financial institutions have the backing of the government. And you start to see, I think, where some of this politics is coming from, some of these headlines are coming from. There's a concern that environmental action is having an effect on these industries, and does risk devaluing something like the car industry, especially if we're talking about not necessarily just going to EVs, but actually reducing car ownership, which is obviously what we talk about a lot. So just to reinforce those points, so the PCPs, which is the main form of financing now, they're underpinned by economically, but they also reinforce car dependency, and they trap consumers in debt spirals while dazzling them with over-engineered and increasingly large vehicles, which of course, as we know, are not used most of the time. So we keep talking about utility. This is why people want cars. They're just sat there. And unlike houses, they tend to depreciate in value very quickly. So they're a terrible investment. The media commentary is wrong. It's not primarily to do with demand and people wanting snazzy vehicles to outdo each other in some race, but actually is being a way to overcome some of the deep contradictions within the car industry itself by using finance to do that. And they've chosen to do that rather than actually reform themselves, rather than actually take on the green agenda and think about how they can start to downscale production or start to make different things, use that machinery and those plants to make things that are actually useful. They've gone for the easy option of using car finance to make car consumers poorer, and well, I should say poorer, but like more vulnerable to financial shock. So I think a broader awareness of this could be an important piece of ammunition in this so-called cultural war, or what I call a false cultural divide, which is partly, as I argue, being manufactured by the car industry itself and their servants in government. So, I think it's not just a stupid electoral pitch to go for this, let's attack 20-mile-an-hour limits and low traffic neighborhoods and pretend that there's some conspiracy theory. It's not just stupid politics, but it's shoring up what is an important constituency, if you like, elite constituency, which has a massive bearing on the politics of our country. Okay.
Tom, that was absolutely fascinating. Really brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure everybody's got lots of thoughts. We've had a couple of questions. Rachel thinks it's capitalism gone mad. I totally agree with Rachel. In fact, Rachel, did you want to come off mute and ask your question? Because I spotted you had one in the chat.
Yep. So, yeah, just a question. I have heard murmurings in the media about, this being the next potential resulting in the next potential financial crash, but it's been very low key and very sporadic. So I just kind of wonder, do you think the powers that be are preparing us for this, or are they just sticking their heads in the sand? I guess that's a question for somebody that might have an understanding of what goes on in the inner circles of government, so there may not be an answer, but it is a bit worrying, isn't it? I find it worrying anyway.
Tom, did you want to come back on that? And Rachel's thought about, is this on the Bank of England's radar? Is it an acknowledged risk?
Yeah, it is on their radar. I'm trying to remember the exact details, but they did a report on it in 2017 that basically said, well, it's okay. We can't see it resulting in a wider problem. I think it's bubbling away under there. I mean, if we take the example of the subprime mortgage crisis, it's similar in the sense that, people were warning about this and we're seeing trends. But I don't think nobody was really saying, look, this is such a massive problem, it's going to cause such a huge fallout. It was just a concern, something on the radar type thing. As to them being prepared for it, no, I don't think they are, or preparing us for it. Certainly not. I mean, like I say, I think there's these, as much as maligned as we are, and other groups like Just Stop Oil are, we've had some impact as activists on politics, and it can't be ignored. It's not just us, of course; it's the scientific community and the academic community and all of these things coming together. So yeah, there's certainly an opportunism there by saying, we're going to meet our climate targets, but not like that, not like anything where you actually try to do something to do reduce emissions from transport. But like I say, I think there's been such a lack of imagination in the car industry in terms of dealing with this issue, that just piling more and more cars and more expensive cars onto the market has been their solution so far. And it goes to the financialized nature of it entirely. It's this, what matters is the next quarter in terms of the share price and that kind of thing. 5 years time, well.
Thanks, Tom. Adam, did you want to come in? Have you got a question for Tom?
Yeah, do you think the problem here is that it's kind of a sunk cost fallacy, where you kind of, you buy the car, but you're not really seeing the loss in value? Whereas, so is that playing into this? So do you think things like road user pricing will suddenly hit people, if that ever comes in? Will that suddenly change? I know, for example, in Bath, they just introduced parking charges based on the size of your engine and CO2. So you can go in with a small car, which is quite a cheap thing, and that'll cost you about £6 for a day, versus a large diesel, a modern diesel, will cost you about £16-17 a day. So do you think there's a problem here, is that the industry knows it makes much more money for bigger cars? It's not what car you buy, you're buying a car, it's the size of it and that sort of thing. And whether or not things like road pricing and getting that, you're going to lose £20,000 over the next 3 years in value, and that's not perceived by anybody realistically. It's just an accepted fact. I don't know if I'm saying anything here, but
no, I think the this point about the size of the cars is really important. So I started off my research by trying to work out what was going on with the SUVs, and actually seeing to what even are they? I mean, people probably know that they have these things called platforms, where actually if you look at the chassis and the core components of a car now, the SUVs aren't off-road vehicles anymore. They're just bigger versions of what are called estate cars, or coupes and that kind of thing. And what that means is that there's a price premium, which is well beyond the actual additional construction costs for SUVs. There's a mad thing where people are paying huge amounts more for SUVs, even though they only cost slightly more to build. And you've seen in the States, and it's becoming like this here too, that the major manufacturers have stopped making non-SUV cars. So there's a whole madness around it. But what I came to was like thinking, well, okay, that's hard as an economist to explain, because price differentials should equal out. If something's being made too expensively, there should be competition which reduces the price. So that's difficult to explain. But I came to this interest in, well, how are people even affording it anyway? We all know that they're ridiculous vehicles to have in cities and that kind of thing, but I just didn't quite understand how people were going to pay for it. And I think this issue, I mean, so apparently with hire purchase, people had this cost for 5 years, but then suddenly the costs of using their vehicle will go down. I think it's something to do, and that doesn't happen anymore, PCPs. You're going to be paying £300 a month for the rest of your life, you know. That must have some kind of psychological bearing. But yeah, when people come along and say, and you're going to have to pay more, you know, because of some ULEZ or some car parking charge, then, and maybe you thought you could afford that SUV. I think this is probably the point you make. You thought you could afford it because it's only £350 a month now. But if you want to park, you're going to pay 3 times the amount of someone that's got a Fiat 500, if they still make those things. Then that wasn't any part of the deal that you signed up to. Nobody told you about that. And it's the government doing it. It's not a consumer choice. That's different.
Thanks, Tom. No, I think you hinted at it in your presentation. I'm sure you, as with most academics I know, you've opened up about a dozen further routes of study by peeking into this, and where you connected to how this impacts on the acceptance of active travel measures, car use reduction, the psychological framework that people have in their heads when anything is done in this space is fascinating. When, as you've exposed, it's kind of a crazy mix of a subprime mortgage scandal meets heroin addiction. It's extraordinary, really. Right, a couple more quick points. I'm going to take Jamie and Andy in succession, if that's all right. Jamie, can I come to you first?
Of course, thank you. Yeah, it was a slightly complex question, but I suppose in terms of wider economics, are there any other good case studies where sectors are basically dying or need to die, and there's this urge to sort of resist and hold on to it to save employment, to save jobs? A key one at the moment could be oil. I am an ex-oil worker myself. I've switched over to a different sector, but the thing in the past might be things like coal. But is there anything that's worked, and is this just a sort of the government showing resistance against biting the bullet effectively?
Thanks, Jamie. Before you come back in, Tom, I'll take Andy as well, just to speed it up if that's all right. Andy, did you want to make your point or ask your question as well, and then we'll go back to Tom?
Yeah, it was just, I guess, less of a question, but more of a point. I think I raised in the chat that, I've got experience in this sector, having worked there previously. So Tom's point around affordability, or what happens with that PCP and the differential between PCP and HP, is a key component, because the finance provider is taking the risk, and obviously, a huge balloon on the end of that payment is what reduces that cost to the end user, or the consumer. So it's just really more of a, if we wanted to pick my brains, have a discussion, there is a opportunity to grab some additional insight in what might be playing in the financial side of things. So I can assist with that, really.
Thanks, Andy. Great offer there. Tom, back over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, Jamie, I think the oil industry is a good. I've got another one just as I'm speaking, actually, and that's aviation. So you might know that my local authority, Manchester City Council, has a large stake in Manchester Airport. During the middle of lockdown, this is a local authority where I don't want to get too political, but you can understand I'm probably at loggerheads with my council over many things. But the leader of our council today was tweeting about the King's speech and saying how they'd not addressed austerity, which is a fair point. But in the middle of lockdown, it gave a bailout loan to the airport of hundreds of millions of pounds. So this is a local authority that signed up to net zero 2038, and all of these sort of green pledges. And there wasn't a moment's thought about doing anything different or using that money any differently. So I think there is a massive political malaise when it comes to these things. And finance is pernicious in that sense, because you have effectively a financial asset which you've invested in, and if you want to divest from it, if you like, you're going to have to take a huge hit. So, I don't know where that gets us, apart from to say, oh my God, that's a huge problem. in terms of cars, though, in the paper, and I'll put a link at the end of the presentation, which I think is going to be on the website. I do offer some things that we could do. I mean, the thing is about active travel is it gives people an opportunity to climb off that ladder, that precarious ladder. So it's another incentive to do it, if you like. It's not just that it's good for your health and good for the environment and good for the public realm. It's getting people out of debt who are might be in serious financial trouble, and allowing them. And you talk about the freedom of the car. They're locked in to a cage of finance around this. And if in any way we can make that clearer in the way we're campaigning, I think that's useful, because I think car drivers understand this to some extent. And Andy, I found this one of the most difficult things to ever research, because the car industry is extremely insular and secretive when it comes to data, and that's why I had to go to things like credit ratings agencies to even try and understand what's happening. So I'd appreciate any insight on that, and I'm sure there's a couple of ways I haven't quite got it right, but I've done the best I can with the public information. But I'm sure there's more that can be done on this.
Thanks, Tom. Well, Andy, can I suggest Tom's email address is on the presentation, isn't it, Tom? If you want to put it on the chat, pop it in the chat, and Andy can drop you a line. Adrian, before I come to you, I'm just going to catch up on a couple of questions Louise from Haringey's put in the chat that would be good to cover off, which is, given how globalized this industry is, Tom, have you looked at whether this is a parallel problem in European countries? Do other European countries have any tighter regulations around this kind of finance? I mean, is this literally happening everywhere, or is it a particular British problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I focused on the British case, but I know that PCPs, I've read that PCPs are prevalent in other European countries too, not least Ireland, I think France, Germany, Spain. And there are very similar products in other European countries, not so much in the States, which what they've gone for is just extending HP. So you take out increasingly long HP contracts, 7 or 8 years, which isn't quite the same thing. But I know nothing about the regulation of finance in those countries. There's basically hardly anything written about this, which made it an exciting area to study, but it made it an incredibly difficult one to find information on. If anyone has any insight into that, I'd be really interested, though. Sorry, I can't be helpful, though.
No. Louise, did you want to come back in on any of that, or is that adequately addressed your points in the chat?
Yeah, I seem to recall, can you hear me? I seem to recall reading an article years ago. I think this is a fascinating and really crucial topic, because it seems just far too easy to put a really expensive car on the road. And then what I hear is people are renewing their cars every 3 years, you know, more than you might do a pair of jeans or a phone or something. So people are drawn into this trap, and as you say, it's a trap. So I think I read, and my sister says in France, there's no way you could get into such debt. There are more stringent rules there. So it would be interesting. I'll see if I can dig out the article. And I also read, I think a while ago, that in the UK we're putting more new cars on the road than any other large European country. So it does seem, from what I read, a particular UK problem, or particularly pronounced here.
Thanks, Louise. Fascinating. Really interesting. I think, yeah, somebody said get Martin Lewis on it. A friend of mine's the researcher for Rip Off Britain, so we can make it really tabloid, this one, blow the lid off it. Okay, I'm going to go last couple of comments and questions from Adrian and Robin in succession, then I'll come back to you, Tom, for last thoughts before we wrap up. So, Adrian, thanks for being so patient. Over to you.
That's fine. So I declare an interest that my background is in finance and risk. So you'll all be going boo now. And actually, it's even worse than that, because it's finance and risk in the city. So I have some background in this, and I think this financial aspect of our car dependency culture is the thing which we just miss as campaigners, because we start from a cycling perspective or a walking perspective and think how good it is environmentally or whatever you like, but we just miss this crucial financial aspect of it. And I think if you look at the subprime debacle in 2007, I think you might see the roots. I think if we look at what's happening now and compare it to the subprime thing, I think we might see some pretty good parallels. So the question is, for me, when does this Ponzi scheme, which is what it is, when does it actually stop? And what's the trigger for doing that? Because there will be one. I just don't know whether it's next month or whether it's in 10 years' time.
Thanks, Adrian. Fascinating, fascinating. Robin, over to you.
Yes, well, I don't know if I'll do worse than Adrian, because I've worked in marketing for a long time, and in mobile phones, and where again you have essentially a financial contract, and then the best practice is essentially a few months before the end of the contract, before the customer starts looking around, you contact them and you say, oh, actually, we've got a really good deal for you. And for only X pounds a month more than you're paying at the moment, you could upgrade to this wonderful new and improved model that's slightly better and only a little bit more expensive than what you've got. And you could upgrade for this much money. And listening to what a few friends have told me about, oh, I've got this great new deal on this wonderful new car, that's exactly what the car industry is doing. And so they're levering people up into SUVs and then a bigger SUV, and they know exactly what car the customer's got. They know how old it is. They know how many miles it's done, so they know how much it's worth. They probably serviced it last time, so they've got the data from that. So they know exactly what offer to make. They're really very sophisticated.
Thanks, Robin. Well, as you know, we're a very non-judgmental bunch here at Active Travel Cafe, but Adrian, Robin, we blame you. No, we don't. So thanks for those points. I think Tom, it'd be fascinating to have your last thoughts and those points made by Adrian and Robin there. What are your sort of last thoughts for us? It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great. So the third to last speaker was asking about regulation, and this speaks to this Adrian's point of comparison with the subprime market. There was a Financial Conduct Authority investigation into what was happening in the showrooms. And one of the things that I found out is that actually car salespeople aren't really car salespeople; they're financial brokers primarily. And secondly, they're car salespeople. So all of their work goes into that leveraging and the packaging, the meeting. So they're sort of the agents in between. They're between. There's the car, there's the customer, there's the financial system. They personify all of those together. But what the FCA found was they had what's called an interest rate commission. They were earning commission by loading people up with more debt, is the simple way to put it. And they put a stop to that, actually, because they said that was actually the reason they said it was actually unfair on the car manufacturers because they weren't making enough money out of it. It wasn't about the consumers at all. But what it highlighted especially was that they really don't check. It really is subprime. And I guess to reiterate the sort of point of my paper is like how cars are seen like housing in the sense that it's one of the last things that you stop paying for if you start running out of money. It like food and like shelter, cars are so important, whether that importance is purely material factors or also partly your psychology and ideology about it. They're so important that people will skip meals to pay their car finance and that kind of thing. That's where you want to get consumers into that place where they go to work to give you money and that kind of thing. But they're not really checking, and it's either going to be a wave of defaults because of a further deflation of living standards. This is addressing the point about when's this going to stop, but also interest rates. So any sort of financial product that involves consumption is at risk, like the housing sector at the moment, from the Bank of England putting up interest rates, which means, by the way, of course, the car industry will be lobbying the Bank of England not to put up interest rates, and that, as estate agents are, and that kind of thing. And yeah, so it's sophisticated, as Robin said, in one sense, you know, in the sense that they're really sophisticated in getting you to borrow as much money as possible. Is it sophisticated as taking a holistic long-term view? Probably not. But it's important to say that when it does come crashing down, you know, we have to be prepared for this to some extent. What are we going to say? Because there's going to be a massive pressure, just as in 2010, for massive bailouts, and you know, and then suddenly your local swimming pool's closing and the library's closing, and all this sort of thing. So there's active travel as both something to prevent this catastrophe from happening, but also the knowledge that the government may, you know, they're already supporting the car industry massively, and they do these, they have done some bailouts already, but that there'll be an opportunity from that chaos to say, shall we just try something different here? And we have to be prepared to make those arguments.
Tom, that's excellent summary there, and being ready is definitely a good shout. Ruth, we did take our last comments, but because it's you, very, very quickly, please do come in.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Tom. Very fascinating. Two things. Lobbying, as we know that the car industry lobbies government massively, and advertising, and advertising cars, big cars sell freedom, especially the SUVs, blah, blah, blah. But recently I've read that Range Rovers, because they're being stolen to order, increasingly insurance companies aren't going to insure them, which in my view is a great thing. But I just wondered, you know, lobbying, advertising, and, you know, that, you know, fun factor of having those kind of cars, has that fed into it as well, that we can't fight against unless the advertising world changes, or we could ban those kind of adverts?
Thanks, Ruth. Very quickly, Tom, do you want to come back on
Sorry,
that?
Tom.
What's up?
That's all right. I think We Are Possible did something on this SUV car advertising. I think it's really important. Yeah, I mean, and the way they're advertised, there's been lots of there's some literature about this, actually, about how it's about how you're destroying nature. Isn't that a good thing? And it makes you a man, or, you know, there's a gender aspects to it, and there's power aspects to it. These things are all really important. But I feel like they're mostly symptoms of a problem rather than the center of the problem itself. So a reform of advertising wouldn't stop these things from happening. It would just temper them to some extent. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Great stuff. I am going to wrap us up there. Apologies, Andy, I know you got your hand up, but we're running out of time. We tend to try and finish at 8:15. My goodness me, we'd have to really run over for that. Tom, thank you so much. You see in the chat, that's caused a huge amount of comment, and everybody's absolutely fascinated. That's been a really, really brilliant contribution. So thank you so much. I am going to call it to a close there. Next week, if you can join us, will be a really good one. We're with the new CEO of the London Cycling Campaign, John Fiennes, is presenting to us, and we've got Ranty Highwayman on. So definitely make it next week if you can. Other than that, please do have a lovely evening, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.